That's just who I am. As a reminder, all members of council are obligated to declare a conflict of interest or pecuniary interest as per section 133 of the Lloydminster Charter regarding any item on the agenda. This meeting is for discussion and information gathering only. All decisions will occur during regular council meetings. We thank all of the city presenters for their time today. Moving on to the agenda item number 2, I will look for direction regarding the approval of the agenda that's presented. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I move that the agenda dated October 1st, 2020 be approved.
For a seconder. Councillor Monroe. Thank you very much. Any further discussion regarding the agenda presented? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to agenda item number 3, the approval of the previous meeting minutes. I'll look for direction of council. Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. I move that the Governance and Priorities Committee minutes dated September 21st, 2020 be approved.
Thank you. Seconder. Councillor Thorson. Thank you very much. Any further discussion on those previous minutes? Not seeing any, I'll call for the question. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Moving on to the main item of this morning and the rest of the day, I'll look to the city manager regarding the draft 2021 budget.
Good morning, Your Worship and Council, and today we are pleased to present for your consideration the first draft of the 2021 budget. Throughout the day, we will have a number of presentations led by our CFO, Denise McDonald, and we will have our staff on hand to answer any questions regarding the submissions that we have, and look forward to a positive day. This document was prepared through diligent cooperation of all our municipal departments and takes into consideration the guidance of our residents from the public engagements sessions. Administration has endeavored to align this budget with council's strategic direction, leveraging federal and municipal funding to support critical infrastructure, attract investment, and spur local economy. We sought to maintain 2020 current services levels, keeping in mind the cost of doing those services. Lloydminster is home to a resilient, youthful, active, and diverse population that holds its municipal leaders to a high level of accountability and fiscal transparency. Go to the next slide, and we'll take you through a timeline of how we've come to this budget process. So back in May and June, we started with the strategic plan being reviewed and updated by City Council. In June, departments started to engage in preliminary budget discussions and training from our finance department. In July, departments commenced with business plan development, operating and capital budgets. And in July, business plan, operating and capital budgets were all due. August, September, we did the community engagement survey, which will have some information presented on the results of those findings shortly. And in September, proposed departmental budgets were presented to our executive leadership in a week-long number of sessions with our ALT at the Operations Center. Today, we have the first draft of the budget presented to the GPC and the current council. And following this, with the information and feedback we get, the next time the budget will be presented is on November 20th, following the municipal election, with council onboarding and budget orientation. And then following that, depending on the progress at that point and the comfort of the newly elected council, either November 30th or December 14th, we'd be looking for approval from City Council for the 2021 budget. Each year, we do engage our residents in the municipal budgeting process to ensure the current needs and wants of our residents are included in this process. Under normal circumstances, we would have conducted face-to-face community engagement exercises around the budget. However, this year, with consideration of COVID-19, we focused our efforts on online engagement. This year, we utilized the digital budget simulation tool, which allowed participants to see in real time the impacts their own spending preferences would have on property taxes. In reviewing the data, at the conclusion of the survey, we were encouraged by the thoughtful feedback shown through the data and submitted comments. We were also able to adjust the first draft of our proposed budget to include some of the preferences and suggestions by our residents. With that, I will call on Jessica Weaver, our Community Engagement Coordinator, to walk you through the finer points of the 2021 budget engagement findings. Now I'd ask if we could hold your questions until she goes through the entire presentation, as some of the questions that you may have maybe further on in the presentation. So if you can track your questions and she'll answer, we'll answer them at the end. So I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Thanks, Jess.
Hey, good morning. So as Dion alluded to, I'm going to discuss the 2021 Your City, Your Dollar budget engagement campaign survey results. So this was open from August 14th to September 4th this year. Sorry about that. So this year we followed a similar structure to what we have in the past, as well as added a few enhancements to the survey. So this year we did the ability to alter the budget allocations to the desired service levels. This was similar to what we had done in the past. It was just the bulk of the survey. For this, we allowed a 3% variance on the current 2020 allocations. And working in finance, we believe that this was a suitable and both realistic scale that could be achieved within our community. We also included the potential taxation calculations based on the adjustable assessment values. So for this, residents could put in their assessment property values to have a more adjustable calculation for them. We also, as a new enhancement this year, allowed for participants to comment on questions as well as like the comments to show their support for what was being said. There was also increased transparency and with real-time results that allowed for participants to compare the desired allocations with those of the rest of the communities before they submitted. For the participation, we had 198 survey response this year. We had 118 comments submitted, and the average time spent on the platform was roughly 9 minutes. So as previously mentioned, as the bulk of the survey was around learning what residents wanted to spend as their desired service levels. So we started off with protective services. We understood that this budget encompasses the fire department, the RCMP, the public safety, 911 administration, and emergency management teams. In 2020, 32% of the residential and commercial tax dollars were contributed towards these services, which was roughly $11.5 million. So through the survey, we understood that the majority of individuals would like to see an increase in these services. The highest contributor was the 1% increase, which was 44% of all respondents, followed closely by that maintaining service level. In total, 20 comments were submitted on behalf of this function. They mainly followed the themes of concern for mental health of the emergency services staff, the desire to increase the services overall, the need to build the sense of safety through more presence and within the streets, as well as the support for the efforts currently being made by the teams. Following that, we went into the social services budget. So this is mainly the SCSS team, which works to connect residents with local nonprofits, as well as support the social service network within the Lloydminster. So last year we allocated 1% of the municipal tax dollars to these services, which roughly was just under $400,000. Through the survey this year, we found that there was a desire by 48% of the respondents to increase service levels, with the highest response being that maintain service levels, which was 26% of all respondents. The comments, so there was 9 submitted on behalf of this service level, or service area, They followed the themes of a need for improved response and assistance in the community. There was a desire for first responders to be better trained with social support and mental health mechanisms. There was a concern for the urgent mental health support wait times. And there was a concern for the community safety in respects to vandalism, graffiti, mental health, and the economic stature. Following social services, we went into the government services budget. So this was 2% of the municipal tax dollars in 2020, and it included the staffing requirements needed to maintain and carry out those essential services and procedures. This was roughly just over $600,000 of municipal dollars in 2020. So within this survey, we had 142 responses on it, and 26% of them favored the increase. Meanwhile, 47% favored a decrease in services. The highest category that was selected was that maintaining the service level or keeping the same services, which was 27% of the respondents as a whole. The comments that were submitted on behalf of this, there was 8 in total, and they followed 3 main concerns, or themes, sorry. So there was the concern for allocating staffing resources, there was the questioning of municipal spending decisions, and there's an emphasis on hiring and utilizing qualified personnel. Following that, we went into the transportation services budget. So this included the roadway maintenance, the fleet, and as well as the airport services teams. In 2020, we allocated 30% of the municipal tax dollars to these services, which totaled roughly $10.8 million. Through the survey, we found that there was a 57% desire to increase services, specifically within that 1% area, which actually had 27% of all survey responses submitted, closely followed by that maintaining the service level. Out of the 12 comments that were submitted on behalf of this, there was the desire to use local products and local vendors. There was a strong need for road repairs. There was an understanding that the city is playing a small game of catch-up on road repairs and upgrade efforts. And there was a praise for the 2019 snow removal efforts, as well as an interest in seeking governmental grants for the funding of these repairs. For the planning and development services, this one included the engineering, economic development, planning and development, and land development teams. In 2020, there was a total of 8% of municipal tax dollars contributed, which was roughly $2.7 million. And through the survey, we did notice that there was a strong desire, roughly 56%, to decrease services within these areas. So the highest category that was submitted was that 1% decrease. So that was 20% of all staff, or all of the submissions, and that was closely followed by the maintaining service level and the 3% decrease. Overall, there was 150 responses on that piece. Within that, there was 17 comments that were submitted through that. The main themes there were the need for the DART budget to act on those implementation items. There was a need for street widening and quicker transportation routes around our community. In particular, there were streets that were noted were the 12th Street, 36th Ave, College Drive, Highway 17, and 75th Avenue. There was a concern that there was too many box stores within our community. There was a need for smaller and more affordable housing options, and there's a concern with the timelines on the implementation projects that have been approved.
Jessica, can I just ask you quick? I got to assume that that's 36th Street, not 36th Ave on that particular one.
I will, yeah, I'll double check on that, but.
36th Ave would be on the very east side, basically almost out of town, so.
Oh, yeah, I will double check on that one. So next we moved on to the recreational services. So this budget includes the Parks and Green Spaces, the Lloydminster Cultural and Science Center, the Bioclean Aquatic Center, Service Sports Center, Lloydminster Golf and Curling Center, the public programming and events, Lloydminster Public Library, the Minjuba Community Theater, and as well as the Legacy Center. So last year, 28% of municipal taxes, so roughly $9.9 million, were contributed towards these services. From the survey, we found that there was a 55% suggestion that we should be increasing services on this. The highest overall response was in that 1% increase, which was 25% of the survey data as a whole. And throughout the 14 comments that were submitted on behalf of this, there was the concern for the future of history and heritage. There was the need for low-income recreation options. There was a desire for the community-based fundraising and funding models rather than taxation funding models. There was a praise for the current recreation facilities and services that are being offered, as well as the stronger need for winter programming. So the next one was a satisfaction question. So because the city has moved into that self-sustaining utility model, we phrased this service area slightly different. We gave residents the understanding that to fund services such as water treatment, wastewater, stormwater, landfill, and curbside collection, it takes roughly $19 million. So based on the rates that they pay and the services that they receive, we asked what their satisfaction was with this. We found that the majority of residents were neither satisfied nor dissatisfied. They were kind of content with the services, with 61% of the 137 leaning in that neutral zone. The comments that were submitted on behalf of this, there was 12 in total. They were around enforcing delinquent accounts rather than deferring payments. Specifically, these were around the rental markets within the community, as well as a concern for the lack of savings for future infrastructure and a support to bring back the Blue Box program. So based on all of the results, our software hosts had created this chart with us. So this was the main increases and supports that were given throughout the survey. So the chart below, you can notice that there's a percent change category that reflects the most popular answer per choice. The approval gives the percent that agreed with the positive or negative change as a whole. So the majority of the respondents saw that 1% variance in the services, with the exception of social services and governmental, which went with the 2% and the maintaining services as the most popular answers. As I mentioned before, this was part of the enhancements of this year's survey, was the real-time data that allowed residents to view each other's responses as they'd been submitted. It was visible through a similar chart to the graphic below here that helped show the unity in submissions and the majority of the responses that were quite closely tied together. So new this year, we had discussed the community issues. So we want to take the opportunity to ask residents what the biggest concerns were on their mind. We asked out of a list of 12 that were comprised off of the themes that we've heard in other surveys and other communication channels, and we asked residents to pick their top 5 concerns. The most popular answers here came to be crime and criminal activity, economy, jobs and economic issues, infrastructure and transportation, health and public health, and property taxes. These top answers were quite unanimous around the voters, and and then there was also 22 comments submitted on behalf of these. They followed 5 main categories, so the first being government. So there was a concern for the allocation of staffing resources. There was a desire for additional information on public engagement. There was a praise for council's progress over the past term. There was a need for a review of the wants versus needs in the community. There was a concern for the increase of property taxes, utility bills, and cost of living for all ages. In respect to the safety category, there was a need for safety in the recreation areas, specifically within those outdoor facilities. There was a need for increased police and police presence, and the need for addiction support. In the transportation theme, there was the need for sidewalk repair and the affordable transportation needed within the community. Within the recreation theme, there came a couple comments around the need for opportunities for all ages. So those were from small toddlers all the way to the elderly population, as well as a priority on the arts and history within the community. And the general comments were the desire to allow urban chickens and the need for hospital capacity and schools capacity. So we do understand that this one is out of our jurisdiction, but it came through as a theme, so we want to mention it. And reserve funding. So within the 2019 and 2020 years, we found that there's additional need to discuss the capital infrastructure within our community. As we have public engagement for some of these specific projects out, we thought it would be beneficial to bring attention to how they are funded and how the future funding of these projects will work. So we addressed that there will always be a governmental grant program that we'll look at, and we also posed a few additional funding structures to see where resident appetites were on making this achievable. In the case of the recreation facilities, so new or enhanced, we saw that there was a pretty equal split between the desire to increase user fees as well as community fundraising to make these happen, followed by a lower response on the taxation and capital borrowing sides. For the road and transportation networks, so this was both new and enhanced, there was a desire for the taxation increases to support that, as well as capital borrowing. The user fees were also pretty closely behind, followed lastly by the community fundraising options. And the water and sewer, so this meaning stormwater, water, and sewer infrastructure, the majority of residents saw that user fees would be applicable, as well as capital borrowing to fund these, followed by that taxation increase. And we also asked several questions based on the demographics, just so we can understand a better idea of who we're listening from, make sure that we kind of have a broad arrangement of the community as a whole. Specifically, we just wanted to touch on the age in this presentation. And so over 50% of the respondents were between that age of 25 and 44, which is the bulk of their residents, according to our last census.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'll look to members of council for questions or comments. Councilman Rowe.
Just a comment, I think it's a really great presentation. There was a lot of thorough thought, obviously, that went into this, and the availability for the residents to have that opportunity to play around with different things to see what that's going to result as a tax increase or decrease by having those services in place. So I think our communications department did a great job engaging with the residents this year, despite all the obstacles that were facing us, coming out with new and innovative ways to really get across to our residents, you know that you still have a voice, even though we can't meet in person. This is your opportunity. So thank you guys very much for compiling all the information together. It looks really good, and it gives us an idea moving forward as we work through the budget, you know, what are the priorities of some of our residents and the important things that are important to them that we really need to focus on. So thank you.
Councilor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I just wanted to comment on the tool in general that was used for the survey. I thought that, you know, it was absolutely fantastic. It did the perfect job of kind of explaining roughly, you know, where things are, people having the ability to see, okay, these are the things I prefer, these are the things I value, and this is how it affects me if I get that improved service that I like, or if I decrease a service that I, you know, don't care as much about. So I just thought overall that the tool was really good. I did have one question, and that's just about kind of turnout. Was that within your expectations, or was it higher, lower, around there? Obviously, we always hope we get as much as possible, but was the 198 roughly where you thought you would get to?
Yeah, thanks. I would say that's pretty on average for what we usually get for municipal budget surveys.
Yeah.
Obviously, I'd like to see higher in going forward, but I think also that is just knowing that there's an education tool out there every year, and we aim to get that feedback a little bit.
Councilor Dowd, you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. That was the question I was going to ask. How do these numbers compare to years prior? Sort of wrap my head around it. And I guess the only other thing, I can't remember the last survey we did, but there's definitely a trend in most areas to increase spending. And I sort of chuckle about that because I also chuckle about the good job on the snow removal. So I guess it's kind of looking at that challenge we have ahead of us, particularly around the economic times. And I know that came out a bit in here as well. But I just, in my own memory, trying to reflect back last year in terms of, did we get similar kind of responses on increasing spending in those areas? And if you remember, that's great. If you remember, if not, that's okay.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think protective services every year is traditionally near the top, along with roads. The one that probably was a little unfortunate this year compared to previous years was the social services end of things. The 2% increase versus, it's a smaller dollar amount, but that was the one that really even in the comments section, there's comments around addictions, around mental health, around that. So that's probably the one that was a little higher than what we would normally see, but the rest are probably okay with what we traditionally see.
Yeah, and that was the other thing, the number of times mental health arose as a comment within the context, and I know when we had the inspector share results as well, they're trying to put strategies around that, but the question in the back of my head, I guess, is to what role we play as a city around the mental health supports in our community, and I don't think we have a budget line for that, frankly, but on the other hand, it's part of our role to advocate on behalf of our city, particularly around public health and all those other pieces, and work with our partners in that regard. So it's a symptom of a much more complex problem.
Councilor Buck.
Thank you, Worship. Thanks for the presentation. I think I just wanted to say thanks to the community for engaging because it's important. I don't know that the last time we had face-to-face public engagements, we'd had 200 people come out to give their opinion. So this is an ease of use type of idea where people can actually do that. And I think, I really want to have that face-to-face public engagement. I like talking to people, and we'll do that as soon as we're allowed to do that again for the next council. We could do that. But the 198 people, I think, is better than we would have got this year, even in a normal year, out to an actual face-to-face public engagement. So I think it gives a decent sample size of what we're looking for and trying to garner that information that we need to make decisions going forward. So when you said you were pleased with the number, we want it to be higher. Of course, it'd be nice to have 20,000 respondents on this survey. But I think it's good. So thanks for all your efforts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been said, thank you very much, Jessica, for your efforts and the communications team, and the support from the rest of the city staff. I think this was an opportunity to engage the community as best as we can in the times that we're in. And it's challenging, but having 200 people take the time to sit down and fill in that survey and spend 10 minutes, because they spent a little time thinking about it for sure. And certainly the results are interesting. It's been expressed around the table. So I'm looking forward to moving through this and seeing where this leads us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. City Manager?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thanks for the comments. I guess the next phase here, we'll get into the meat and potatoes of the day, and not just prior to turning it over to Denise. I do want to commend our entire team for the document that was put together today, and in particular our finance team that led the way. There's been a lot of hours put into this presentation and to the end of the work, along with coordinating with all our departments. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our CFO, Denise McDonald, who will start the presentation on the budget.
Good morning, Council.
Good morning, CFO.
We'll start right off with our current state, Lloydminster today. Business, government, families, and individuals have all been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And to help clients, stakeholders, and the market at large navigate the impact, the city recognizes a three-phase framework that was identified by Deloitte.ca: respond, recover, and thrive. The city is focused on learning from the pandemic with the intent on emerging stronger, maintaining citizen service levels, and manage critical resources while preparing for a new normal. Recovery, working collaboratively with the community stakeholders on a recovery plan to build a more dynamic, resilient, and secure city. And then our future is that the city will work towards building in nimble, secure processes and systems to ensure Lloydminster has the ability to thrive as social and economic indicators begin to show signs of genuine recovery. I believe at this time we're still in between the respond and recovery stage. Our key challenges, of course, number one at this time is COVID-19. The city is preparing for significant future decreases as we continue to respond to the pandemic, keeping an eye on recovery. Our infrastructure deficit, council has made progress on a number of infrastructure items, and administration continues to refine its asset management strategy to address the city's true infrastructure deficit. Protective services, as indicated in the community engagement, the city continues to address staffing and capital requirements to meet the community needs and current protective services, which include fire, police, and public safety. And of course, our facility refresh and replacement. We will continue to work on refreshing the public library and the Westminster Culture and Science Center, as well as the new wastewater treatment facility that is currently underway. Our provincial budgets may result in a reduction of municipal grants, and this leaves the city with few options to offset some of these increased costs. With that, we'll go right into the operational budget, and I'll give you a few highlights of what we're presenting here. So overall, just to give you a synopsis of what's coming in the presentation, is we're proposing a 3% increase in the municipal tax levy. The utility rates have been adjusted by 3%. Contribution of 1% to operating and capital reserves, and a focus on infrastructure priorities established for our multi-year maintenance and capital plans. With consideration to economic realities, administration worked diligently to keep the costs at a minimum without reducing service levels. Not included at this time is the unfunded amortization of $23 million, and we left it out for ease of identifying the balanced budget. That keeping in mind today's economy, economic realities, administration worked diligently to keep the costs at a minimum. We are continuing with the current fire department model and the new collective agreements for the fire department. This budget continues to enhance snow removal was added in the 2019 budget, and includes one full removal in addition to the regular winter maintenance programs for arterials, noting that one full snow removal costs $1 million. Money collected in the stormwater revenue is placed in a reserve, and the capital infrastructure drawn from that reserve. A review of the costs versus revenues illustrate that the work completed is consistent with the revenue collected today, if not more. Our CMP contract increases are included. And finally, we are, I've already identified that. So the next item on there gives us a historical budget so that you can identify the last 2 years of the operational budget compared to the one we're proposing today. This gives you a big picture view of our budgeting process and where we're at. The revenue side shows that user fees are declining, investment income reduced due to the drop in the interest rates. Operating grants have held constant, but we've been told that the future may be different. Penalties and costs of taxes have held its own. Licenses and permits include business licenses and development permits. They are declining due to the economy as well as due to the pandemic. Keep in mind that we are making some accounting changes over the last couple of years that make some of the lines difficult to compare. But you can see that if we remove the transfer from reserves in 2019, the $5 million, if we take that out and net it against the expense on the bottom of 21, the years seem a little more comparable. So the total of 88 million becomes 83 million, and increased for the budget of 2020 to 83.8, and budget for 21 proposed decreasing to 82.9 for revenue. When we look at that net on the bottom, the 88.2 changes to 88.0. It's 88.0, and the budget for 20 went up to 83.8, and of course, keeping it balanced at 82.8 for 21. The expense side shows salaries and benefits have increased over those 3 years. This takes into account many changes in the fire department from a volunteer fire department, and increased costs for the RCMP contract, as well as the settlement of 2 union collective agreements. Contracted services is slightly decreasing, while materials and goods have remained constant. Utilities are constant. Transfer to local governments and agencies includes support to other organizations such as the library, VIC-JUBA, FCSS grants, and community services grants, showing that it has been fairly consistent year to year. Bank charges are now now include our POS terminals. So though there have been increased cost savings here, there'll be a relative, the increased cost here, there's a related decrease in the contracted services. We have made progress in reducing and limiting the bank service fees over the 3 years, though that progress will be blurred by this entry when we move the expense over from the POS. Bad debt is just an entry that is calculated at 0.12% of our receivables and is based on our history. Overall, there is a surplus, and the municipality cannot run a deficit budget. So it's important that we show a balance or a surplus budget. When we get to the next slide, this shows our future years. So we're looking at the proposed budget for 2021 and a future budget for 2022 and 2023. These budgets show that our managers are developing multi-year budget planning and planning into the future. While these budgets are draft and require some further development, it's important to report to council the progress that has been made in this area. We are forecasting that revenue streams are recovering slowly, but also that government grants may be declining. I think it's relevant to everyone that at some point the grants are going to stop increasing for us due to COVID, and we'll have to recover from that. It illustrates that revenues lost continue to occur. Taxation will need to increase to support those inflationary costs. On the expense side, you can see salaries have stabilized. Interest on long-term debt is increasing, as well as principal debt payments have increased. In this forecast, we've included 3% increase in taxes and utilities every year in order to support the expenses, and we've increased our transfer to reserves to balance the budget on those forecasting years. Our next slide shows our existing debt. So these are our true debentures, the year that it was borrowed, the total amount of borrowing, the current amounts outstanding sitting at 32.2, and the last payment date. So you can see that we are committed to repayment, and we will start to see relief in 2026. The last payment will be made in 2036. However, current commitments for the fire hall and the wastewater treatment plant will take us beyond that. Our next slide shows us our projected debt. So debt limit is calculated at 1.5 times the operating revenue sources plus any grants received for capital. Some municipalities use a self-imposed threshold of 75%. That is shown by the gray line. Our borrowing authority uses that threshold to determine if they want to require the municipality to do a financial review for borrowing prior to accepting further borrowing. The municipality has existing debt of 30 million today, forecasting at 32 million by 2021, and have plans to borrow for the wastewater treatment plant and the fire hall. The dark blue line shows our current debt and its projection. The light blue line shows the projected debt that includes the anticipated borrowing and their timeframes. This graph is important for determining future infrastructure replacements if debt is an option to leverage. Please feel free to ask questions as we go. Go ahead.
Councillor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. I didn't realize that was one of the rules. So within that, have you added in anything other than the wastewater treatment plant and the fire hall within this chart?
No.
It's the only spot that it beats up. So just thinking long term about, new libraries, new cultural facilities, and there may be additional bumps in there along the road when things actually start to happen. So just something to keep in mind as we look forward. And I just had a comment. I don't know. I got a few looks because I was smiling ear to ear when you presented a multi-year operating budget. That is something that I've been kind of really pushed towards for the past few years, and all of council I know was interested in knowing that we had more of a long-term plan as we go through, where we have a better look at what the future looks like, so that when you get into strategic planning, you can have a good look at what you're going to be able to do in the future, and keeping an eye, a couple steps ahead, so you know what you can and can't do, and the different challenges coming towards you. So even if it's just a start, it's a great start, and I'm happy to see it. Thanks.
Councillor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. We're looking at increases here and there. The one that I wondered if we had a little more detail on was the RCMP contract, just so that the public can know that that's an expense that's coming that's uncontrollable. Do we have any idea what kind of impact that one thing has on the protective services budget?
City Clerk.
If I could ask for a little more clarity, are you talking about the potential increases as a result of their bargaining?
Yes.
Well, right now, the federal government is still in bargaining with the RCMP. We're not at this point sure of when that will be completed. We suspect sometime in the coming year, but it could be a year after that as well.
And there's some back pay included.
There's absolutely, there's
yeah.
up to 5 years worth of back pay included into that. The CFO can speak to that we have looked at ensuring that we have some reserve in order to cover those expenses.
Yes, and we speak to that in the variances later on in the presentation.
Yeah, I just wanted to know, watching what the federal government's doing with their negotiations on the RCMP contract, in case anybody wasn't aware of it. It's got a fairly large potential hit to every municipality in the country, including ours.
Every municipality that contracts to the RCMP,
Yep.
provinces will have the responsibility to cover those that policing costs that they cover. But you're right, in the case that we have an individual contract with the RCMP to provide municipal police services, it does have a significant potential to be felt in our community.
Yeah, it's just one of those things as our team's doing a great job of budgeting, and there's one of those, side pitches that comes out from left field, and you don't know where it's going to go.
Absolutely, and when that is going to arrive, we have no clue. So that's a challenge. That's
And our CFO and finance team have done a good job anticipating the back pay and the impacts of that.
Yep.
Councillor Thorson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had one other question written down, and it was just about the other levels of government support. It looked as though, and maybe I didn't see it correctly, as though we hadn't changed much on that. Like we hadn't decreased the funding we're receiving from the other levels, because we generally don't find that information out until February or March. So, but at this time, we're not adjusting downwards or anything like that.
No,
following
the grants
the
are fair.
process.
I'm sorry. Thanks for the question. The grants certainly are, we know they're declining slightly, but for next year, it seems to be holding its own. However, we have heard rumors that maybe 10% in future years. So at some point, when the governments are giving out quite a few grants right now to get recovery from COVID, at some point, it's going to decrease because they will have to pay for that. So I think we have to take advantage of every grant we can get right now, because the future may be a decline in those. So the reality is we have to look at where our revenue is going to come from if we don't get those grants, and how do we sustain our service levels and our capital spending. However, I would like, when you had asked about the operating multi-year, we also have multi-year capital. We have not included in this presentation, but we'll be sure to include some information on the capital multi-year planning, a summary of some sort, in the second presentation.
Yeah.
Any other questions at this time?
Worship, just a comment on the, we will have to, we're aware that if, should the government grants reduce come April, May, we will have to make adjustments to this budget, or council will have to make a decision to reduce project services or take money from reserves to pay for those projects that we've approved. So those are decisions that we're aware of that may have to come should the grants, because some of them are operational, some of them are capital. So depending on which grants are affected will depend on how we react, or will have to react to those decisions.
Thank you, City Manager. CFO, would like to carry on, please.
Okay, then the next slide shows our debt payments. The blue bar The blue bar demonstrates the existing debt payments, which steadily decline until they're finally paid off in 2036. The yellow bar demonstrates the projected debt payments, which will be consistent past 2050 due to the water treatment plant.
And CFO, if I can, those are required payments. We cannot skip a payment as per se. That's one of the first items that we as a municipality are responsible to ensure that our debts are serviced on an annual basis. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. There sometimes are opportunity to pay out a debenture. However, it's dependent on a penalty basis and what's happening with the interest rate.
Thank you.
But no, we can't get away from them. They're scheduled. Okay, the next slide speaks to our reserves. So this slide shows a forecast to the end of December 2020. The first section is our restricted reserves. So those are legislated reserves that are required to be used for certain purposes. So you can see that we're forecasting that will decrease to from 13.1 million to 11.6 million for budget 2021. We are utilizing some off-site levies for some of our capital projects where applicable. Unrestricted reserves, so we've broken them down into the departments. So you can see that our focus has been to increase our unrestricted reserves to help for future capital infrastructure requirements. We are forecasting December 31st to be at 34 million. We are utilizing some of those reserves to offset our taxation increases in order to support our capital program in this budget. So we're forecasting by the end of 21, we will be in a less reserve position of 33.9.
That's what, just to be clear, that's assuming that all our projects come in exactly on budget this year, so if we have surplus at year end, that would add to that number, should be a surplus at the end of 2020.
Councilor Flores.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is a certain amount of the reserve forecast for 2020, I guess that would have been the forecast. Is it the forecast or the budget? That's not the original budget number, or is this the forecast where we're looking at what the end of the year is based on the information we have right now?
It's forecasted based on the information we have right now and what we have budgeted in the year to be.
Thank you. So then a certain amount of that, or quite a bit of that 34, let's say on the unrestricted side, are projects where we're started or we've already got tax funds for those and we haven't got all the way through, or it hasn't quite been started because of timing, one thing or another. But that's what a significant amount of that 34 million would be, correct?
It's including everything we've done. We've used that in our assumption that all the capital work will be done.
Okay. Got it.
In my notes, though, I have some historical information from the prior year, so that you can see where our reserves have come from and where we're at today. So in 2018, we had unrestricted reserves of 10.2 and 29.8 and unrestricted of 10.2. 2019, we went to 36.6 in unrestricted and 11.4, and then 2020 you see above. The City of Lloydminster is focused on contributing and building reserves to set aside funds for future infrastructure requirements and now budgeting for some contributions to reserves. There is progress. Other municipalities are proposing limited increases to tax levies due to the economy and pandemic, and they're drawing from reserves in order to support that. However, our municipality has made significant focus on increasing our reserves, and we're not in the same position to draw from reserves to help support the tax increase, and thus why we're looking at a 3% increase for the tax rate. We will continue to work with an acceptable balance for our reserves of a city this size, and that should be whether it's a percentage of tax revenue annually or a percentage of our fixed assets annually. And we will include that in our reserve policy review later this year. The next slide shows our grant revenue for operating. So there's a number of smaller item grants. The total in operating, we're looking at 4 million. We could pick out a handful of the bigger items. So the SAS revenue sharing grant is received from the Saskatchewan government. The FCSS grant from Alberta is listed there at 465,000. SAS lottery grants given to the community, our share from the regional for recreation and culture, totaling 4 million. It's fairly consistent from year to year. We hope that that will continue. The next slide shows our capital grants. And so Canada ACAP grant is for the airport. Of course, if we receive that grant, that capital work goes ahead. If we don't receive the grant, we don't go ahead with that capital project. Municipal stimulus grant, we have received it. It's included in the vote. Council's already committed a project to that. MSI capital grant is fairly flexible in what we can use it for. We typically use it for infrastructure. Saskatchewan federal gas tax is listed there, and as well as the Alberta federal gas tax. Those typically can go towards infrastructure. We've shown this to you in the areas of where it's being supported. So transportation services and then environment services. The total grants are 31.3 million.
Councilor Blanchard.
So, this is just a quick question, and it's actually on the prior page. I was scribbling a note here, but I noticed that we received recreational grants from our neighbors in Alberta, but none from our Saskatchewan RMs. And in the past, we had. So we're not anticipating any revenue from them moving forward in the next year's budget. Is that accurate?
We haven't received any from our Saskatchewan. One neighbor, to my knowledge, we've never received any from. The other one we haven't received since 2018, I believe was the last time we received funding. We have requested that they continue the funding, and we were denied.
Thank you.
If I could ask again, we often have inquiries about, back to the backslide one more time, sorry, regarding the monies for highways through our city. We do receive money from Saskatchewan in the amount of $51,000 to maintain Highway 16 and Highway 17 on the Saskatchewan side, but there is no other fiscal support from either government to support the maintenance of those two major highways that cross our city.
Yes, and it's not a negotiable item either. It's based on the formula of what they're giving all municipalities in Saskatchewan.
Thank you.
And that also changes once you become a city. That's when the bar changes. If you're a town and have a provincial highway through, you receive provincial, in Alberta, the provincial government's responsible for that. But when you become a city, or when you are a city, the municipality is responsible for that.
Capital grants, is there any more questions on capital grants?
There's a series of grants there that I believe are also tied to the wastewater treatment plant. That's
Yes.
so there's the monies that's been allocated and discussed numerous times in the last year after receiving those grants or approval of those grants. Those are included in that number. So.
Okay, operating revenues. So we reviewed a big picture of the 5-year budgeting, and now we're going to deep dive a little bit into the 2021 revenue a little here. This slide shows that the municipality's revenue sources for 2021 operating budget, and it illustrates all revenue sources broken down into taxation, land division, and utilities. And then, of course, the last column is the total. Net taxes are shown here are including a 3% increase. User fees and sales of goods includes the majority of our revenue generators, facility rent, sale of goods, utilities totaling 32 million. We have adjusted the utility rates by 3%. Land sales have been included for residential, non-residential lot sales, and this is strictly a budget number to reflect how the entries are recorded. With land sales, the cost of sales will be deducted and any profit on the sale will be contributed to the subdivision land reserve. Government transfers are similar to 2020, and we look at grants in detail later in the presentation. Oh, that was ahead. We moved it in the presentation. However, we are concerned at some point in the future the grants will be reduced. Investment income has decreased due to interest rate decline, but still remaining consistent at 1.3 million. We have been conservative in that estimate, so any increase in earnings will help the bottom line. Penalties and fine revenue are sitting at 1.47 million. This has fluctuated year to year as we are learning more about the potential revenue sources in the protective services area. Though fines are issued, there may be a lag time in collection, and it's important that those revenues are reported conservative so that we're not in a shortfall situation. Licenses and permits include business licenses, development permits, taxi bylaw permits. It's down slightly due to the pandemic and the economy. Franchise fees and concessions are at 5.9 million, slight decrease for 2021. Transfers to reserve have been included in the event that we need to utilize a recruitment firm. If the services are not required, no draw will occur, but if it is required, there will be no impact on the bottom line to the taxpayer. Therefore, given our forecasted revenues for 21, the estimated tax levy increase, we derive approximately 37 million from taxation. The next slide shows our expenses projected for 2021 in the same categories: taxation, land division, and utilities. Salary and wages are at 34.9 million, of which include moving to a modernized fire model and the collective agreement for fire union, as well as the final year of the other collective agreements. We have done comparative analysis of other municipal salary and benefits per capita, and the city of Lloyd is on the bottom quarter of the comparison for both Saskatchewan and Alberta. Salaries are sitting at 41% of the bottom line, which can typically range from 40 to 50% for municipalities. It includes 5% regular increases for salaries and benefits from step increases and the cost of living adjustments for the collective agreement. No new position numbers in comparison to 2020, just some reorganization. Contracted services are where most of the expenses fall, including travel and subsistence for conference and travel. Overall, our contracted services have decreased to 765,000 approximately, and some is due to lack of confidence that we'll be able to travel. 2020 includes our RCMP retro, and we've excluded this item in 2021. If there is a call for it, we will support it by a draw from reserves versus increasing the tax rate. We expect that it's in the neighborhood of 700,000 RCMP contract costs are increased by 279,000, and an increase in rent for the cultural center has been included, but also a decrease for contracted services for snow removal. Goods, materials, repairs, and utilities have remained fairly static. Transfer to local government boards and agencies, including FCSS, community services, contributions to local agencies, as well as the library, Vic Juba, startup, SPCA, Sask lotteries, but it does not include any extra funds for nonprofit grants. Bank charges are increased as we move to the POS terminals in this area and are consolidating all our accounts to show a truer picture of these banking transaction costs. Long-term interest on long-term debt is up 206,000 due to the wastewater treatment plant and the fire hall debt in with a related increase to principal debt payments of approximately $430,000. Cost of sales is the cost of land entry in our books. Profits are being shown to be contributed to reserve. No, these are strictly estimated sales.
CFO, if I could, Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on the wastewater treatment plant, so because the completion will be for a few years, is the assumption that we're going to have interest-only payments until the finishing of the project rather than, a full debt payment?
So there's different tools to borrow. So in the fire hall, we used a disbursement loan, which meant that we have interest only until we have the final draw on that disbursement loan. However, the water treatment plant, we're planning to draw, and when we draw, we'll have interest and principal payments on the draw. But we can have multiple draws, so we'll draw as we need it.
So then at some point it'll consolidate and not be like you have 15 different loans by the time you're completed the project? That doesn't matter.
They do not consolidate, they end up being separate debentures, but all on the same bylaw, borrowing bylaw.
Okay, that's interesting.
We will report them combined.
Right. The only other question I had as we were going through this, it was actually on the last page, and a couple pages back. What was the 2018, or what's the tax increase from the 2019 budget rather than the 2020? So, and we've talked about 3%. 3% factors in a pretty significant kind of change of direction when we set the mill rate because of COVID. I think maybe for the next meeting, I think that's a relevant number, because definitely tax relief was part of the strategy in March or April, May when we set that. So I think it's a relevant figure for a lot of people to understand what this budget really looks like compared to prior years.
Certainly, we can give you those numbers later this afternoon even.
Thank you.
Okay. We are at provision for landfill closure. So this is a requirement of landfills to establish a provision for future expense requirements to close the landfill. This is an annual entry. There was.
Councilor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. So, yeah, this one is one that kind of jumps off the page to me as well. So you've got the post-closure liability, and it would be sitting at whatever since the beginning of time that's on the city's books. Now, this year, are we actually funding it with tax dollars, and we're going to actually build up a reserve in a sense, or to have cash to match the liability? Because you're going to expense it, and then you're going to have a growing liability. And it's going to grow and grow and grow until the day you actually have to close it, and you need to have the cash on hand to be able to pay that bill, to be able to close the landfill. So the question is, do we have to do catch-up, I guess, on whatever we have for post-closure liability over a period of time?
I'll speak to that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We've been recording this transaction in the past, but it hasn't been reflected in the budget, and for transparency, we felt that it was important to include this so that council and the public understood that we are accounting for closure at some point in time, and we are recording the liability to make sure that we have the funds available when that occurs.
So I think to answer the councillor, if what I understand is there has been money set aside, it just now, we are seeing it as an actual budget line.
Yes, that is correct.
Thank you. And thank you for that transparency, because I think that's very important. We've had that discussion around this table about the cost of the landfill, and I think that's one of the public's, again, it's part of the utility that we see each and every day, but we've experienced the cost of adding a cell, and we can only imagine the cost of total closure of the landfill to meet the new requirements today of regulations and the environment. So I think it's important that we keep a close eye on that one. Thank you very much.
So you can see that we have a subtotal here, and this shows our surplus deficit before transfers. So you can see our taxation is in a deficit position at 1.9. Our land division has a surplus of 716,000, and our utilities has a surplus of 13,000.6. Then we include our transfers to reserves and divided by those areas. So this year we've included a small 1% contribution to reserves to help establish some reserves for building maintenance plans and unforeseen items by department, and we are forecasting budgeting for that. Now, this isn't necessarily new dollars. So in the past, we put money towards a resiliency reserve, and so this is equivalent to taking that room up. And then we're putting aside money for capital reserves. Fleet replacement has been, we've established, we charge internal charges to our departments for the replacement of any fleet purchases. So this is the contribution to reserve to support that. Annual transfer community safety initiatives. So this is money that's set aside from photo radar to use in initiatives to make the community safer. Special transfer to other government capital reserve, and so that's a small amount of money to set up for future infrastructure deficits for council's disposal. And the last item on there is the capital program. So these are current year's taxes going towards current year capital programs. So 2.3 in taxation, the profit from any estimated land sales goes into their reserves so that their net should be zero. And then under utilities, we have our capital programs at 4.6. That total is 7.7, and just to note that we will also have a 6 million draw on reserves to support our current reserves to support the current capital program. The next item is our expense side of things. Municipal, this is by department. So we looked at a deep dive by categories, and now we're looking at by department. When were we supposed to have a break? Did you want to have a break now, or do
Certainly.
you want to?
Clerk, do I need to call for a motion for a recess?
Yeah, motion.
Look for a motion to recess. Councilor Belichick, seconded by Councilor Monroe. All in favor? Carried. 15-minute.
Earlier, there was a question regarding municipal taxes for 2019. So we went back to our historical budget for 19, 20, and 21, and you can see the difference between 19 and 20, and I did a quick calculation, and that's less than 1% decrease from 19 to 20. Does that answer your question? Counselor, I can't remember who asked the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the 35, that is what we had amended the budget to be, to provide some relief due to COVID when we set the mill rate, correct?
That's the final number that we use to requisition taxes.
Okay. So yeah, what I was asking was, what was the budget for 20 prior to the amendment, I guess, but we did a
Okay.
decrease.
I believe we were at about 36 to 500,000.
36.5, so there's a difference of 500,000. Okay, I can work with that, thank you.
Okay. So this part of the presentation, how we're planning to present it to council is to show expenses by department for operating and then the related capital. So we have managers waiting in another room that if you have specific questions regarding their budgets or their capital items, we will call them out to answer your questions. So I have some speaking notes to it, but they are available for more detailed questions. So the first section is on general government. The first line item on there is, I should just run through. So the left-hand side is the department area or service area, and then we show the revenue and expenses, the net of those revenue and expenses, and then the prior year's net, so that you can have a comparison of what we had in the budget for the previous year is on the right. So municipal revenue. This includes all general municipal revenue, taxes, grants, and interests. So you can see that that is higher than the previous year. The city council, we've established a budget for each council member attending both provincial conferences based on the new council due to no knowledge of the election results. So we want to make sure that every position has the same amount of money because at this point we don't know what will happen with the results. Salaries are adjusted to the new council remuneration policy. City manager's office, please feel free to question along the way. City manager's office had a cost savings of one executive position and a related administrative support in 2020, and it was managed by another executive position and an admin support for an interim period of time. Those positions have now been reinstated. A lean pilot project was introduced in 2020 and is proposed to continue under the city manager department and introduce that way of thinking to the rest of the city, to citywide. The next section is legislative services, and it includes records management, internal legal training, governance documentation, development and review. Records management increased due to insurance cost increase and centralizing the insurance costs. Legal services have increased slightly. Assessment and taxation and land leases. This past assessment year, 2020, was the first year to complete the full assessment process. Budgeting remains fairly static, and land leases show a reduction in lease revenue of approximately $60,000.
CFO, sorry, that revenue line for assessment taxation, is that lease revenue that is attributed through that office?
Bare land leases.
Bare land leases, thank you.
Communications includes the following: recreation and culture events marketing of approximately $145,000. One of the communication team's primary function is supporting cost recovery through strategic marketing of the city's recreation and cultural programs. Economic development, land and tourism, $75,000. and Communication expects to provide significant marketing and communication support for the economic development and land division objectives, including business attraction, event attraction, tourism, and municipal land sales. They will continue with community information and engagement and facilitating constructive public dialogue. The city engages residents in important municipal decisions and furthers its commitment to transparent governance. Employee relations and safety includes collective bargaining with QP and IAFF. The current collective agreements for both QP and IAFF expire December 31st, 2021. Development of job evaluation factors and alignment of job descriptions, no additional budget required. Provide transparent and consistent basis for position banding and job evaluation. Will ensure all positions are aligned equally in the correct classification bands. Let's see. Under finance, we have a proposed budget for finance department has increased by 8% for the following reasons. 5% regular increase to salaries and benefits from step increase and cost of living adjustments per the collective agreement. No change in staffing levels in comparison to 2020. In addition, 2.5 of the contracted services, an additional 2.5% of the contracted services to support financial reporting, development and facilitation of the lien processes as proposed in the business plan. The significant reduction to professional development and required travel due to COVID group restrictions. Business licenses. Though difficult to predict considering the current economic climate and COVID-19, we've had a negative impact on business sustainability. We've done some analysis and conclude that revenues may be relatively stable. However, we reduced them by 1%. Current 2020 revenues are down about 7% to date as of September 15. Business license revenue has also been split between department, which it supports. Rather than grouping the revenues in finance and then transferring a portion to a different department, we've simply recorded that revenue to those departments and reduced some of our entry requirements. For example, revenues generated from the cannabis retail supports the Protective Services Initiative. Similarly, some of the revenue generated under tobacco retailer supports the community programs. These revenues have been recorded directly to those departments. Information technology. So this includes our regular ongoing network equipment, desktop laptops, multifunctional printers will show up in the capital side of things. Building maintenance, we have the 2021 operational budget for building services will maintain its current service levels with little to no increase. Municipal expenses, the last line item on there includes $600,000 to general government transfer to reserve for council's allocation to future infrastructure deficits, $2.3 million for capital programs under taxation. This is much lower than last year, as last year we grouped all transfers under general municipal. Overall, general government has a 35% increase in surplus, and mainly due to changing how we're reflecting that transfer to reserves. So it's just an accounting change here. In 2020, all transfers to reserves were reflected under general government. However, in 2021, we intended to reflect the transfers to reserves in the originating department to ensure true revenues and expenses and surplus deficits were more transparent. This also supports our continuous evaluation of potential funding strategies for each unit. This change has mostly impacted the environmental services and planning and economic development. Overall, general government revenues are budgeted to increase 1.87%, and this includes the 3% tax increase. It is not enough to offset the forecasted decline in investment income and user fees. The next slide is the related capital for those departments. So here you will see Here you will see the capital item description, what was submitted, and what was accepted by administration, and what was deferred for future years. So building maintenance has a regular furniture replacement program to replace furniture and equipment. It's submitted at 47,000, was accepted at 30,000, and 17,000 of that is deferred. Safety has a furniture replacement for work modifications. That's not the right word for it. Accommodation and ergonomics for special considerations for staffing requirements. So we annually budget for 15,000, and that was accepted. City Hall parking lot repair, 50,000, accepted 50,000. The atrium parking lot repair, 33,000, and accepted. Under information technology, we are including the recreation software and TV displays at the Service Sports Center, and it includes $15,000 was submitted and accepted. IT application software for HRIS system is at $150,000 was submitted and accepted. I have a little information on that one. HRS system will improve communications, secure storage of personal, private, and confidential information, timely accessibility for managers and employees, streamlines the processes, automatic prompts, identifies red flags, and enhanced reporting functions. Employee relations required system functions included recruitment, safety, payroll, benefit administration, performance management, training, orientation, and career development. Council chambers audio, video, and meetings submitted 140,000 and accepted. IT network hardware, 57,000 and accepted. Desktop hardware, it's a regular replacement program, citywide, 90,000 accepted. Legislative services, building appraisals for insurance purposes, and it was submitted at 90,000 and deferred.
CFO, could I ask for a little further explanation on council chambers audio, video, and meeting webcasting update?
Yes. What would you like to know?
I know that since this council was elected, we've added video, and we've certainly experienced some challenges in the last year regarding having communication. We did Zoom meetings that this council participated in, the public was accessible to. We've been challenged since then by returning back to council. So what are we all looking at? Are we looking at bringing things to the state of the art so that no matter basically what we face, be it another COVID pandemic or challenges, that what's being proposed, because we do have a system that works today, but what are we looking at?
Certainly what we had planned to do under the IT area was to identify how to meet the needs of this room to provide a better product to the public. So we split it up into like a design phase that we will go out and seek information on how to deliver the product and then do an RFP for the remainder of it. So initially we had put forward under the IT of 120, and that includes the software required to do that. And we increased it because we suspect that it might be more, and that would include the whole communications, the cameras, the overhead, and sound system, making this whole room much more conducive to an environment we may need in the future.
Thank you. I think that we've seen some challenges.
I think also important to note, one of the things we're looking at is we currently use eDrive system for agendas. And the new system we're looking at will allow an individual who wants to look up online a specific item, the ability to go directly to that item rather than go to YouTube that we currently have and watch 2 or 3 hours of council meeting to get to that item. So it allows for more accessible and transparent opportunity for the public to view items of their concern.
Thank you.
Thank you.
If I can ask one other, did the multifunction printers if you're recalling from last year's budget, did we put some of that off through the process, and that's where we're at for another 2,000, because I think that's an annual replacement, but I think there was some early in 2020, there was maybe that was when we were looking at COVID expenditures and things like that.
Exactly that. In 2020, we deferred, I believe, 2 printers,
Okay.
and now we're putting forward those 2 printers.
Thank you.
So the next, if there's no more further questions, then I'll go to the next department, would be Protective Services. So under Protective Services, operations, public safety / alert. It has revenue declines and some first-time expenses for that area. It includes SPCA as a multi-year term funding agreement as part of the dog pound for municipal services that it provides for the city. RCMP contract costs have increased. Fire services, since the collective agreement has been signed, expenditures have been phased in since 2020. Fire prevention program initiatives, they're implementing the recommendations from the fire service master plans. There is an identified need to implement more proactive fire prevention and public education programs. This includes self-contained breathing apparatus replacements in operating of 50,000, and you'll see further total replacements in capital side. Emergency management includes basically inflationary costs. Overall, there is a 2% decline in revenues in comparison to 2020 because last year we included $720K transferred to reserves to offset the expected retro pay in RCMP. So it's just a variance between years. This year we've excluded it, and if it's called for, we'll pull it from reserves. Additionally, the execution of the collective agreements has resulted in a 12% of additional costs that have been phased in over time. The capital.
Go ahead. Question?
And does that include our increase to the SRO officer? Because our contribution increases
Yes.
on a yearly basis, right?
The SRO is on a scale, increasing scale, so the first year we didn't contribute as much, but over time we will move towards totally.
At full city expense by year 5, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think I can't remember what exact year that is that we're at the full. I thought there was 2 more years to go.
Glenn's out here if you'd like to come.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll just wait till, if we want to bring them in, staff in. Welcome, Glenn.
Hey, Glenn.
You want to? Who wants to rephrase that?
Yeah, if we could ask that question again, Councilor.
Please.
I just want to ensure that the increase was calculated for the SRO officer because of the sliding scale, correct? That each year the city's contribution to the SRO officer increases to year 5, which it would be the full amount to 150,000.
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So what year are we currently on then?
We're currently entering into year 3,
Right.
and we also adjusted this year's fees based on the fact that the SROs were not in the schools from the middle of March on to the end of June,
Okay.
which is part of the agreement.
Great. Thanks.
Any other questions? Pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. The other question, I guess the question I had is on the revenue side for fire, and I know we've explored it, we've talked about it, but I'm not sure where we're at, but false alarms and repeat false alarms and collecting fees as part of that process, the fines are part of that process.
So currently, and shortly, council will be able to do the updated fire bylaw, which will deal with those type of items. And I believe Emily is at the door and can speak to the increased revenue line that they've identified for that.
Maybe if we can, any other questions for Protective Services for Glenn?
Yeah, and I guess just the other part too is that the costs for billing to insurance companies before fires, and I'm probably not really grabbing.
You're on the right track, but I think we just need to change out the manager, the respective responsible manager on that, Counselor. I think
Can
you
you
get,
actually
I can't help you with the fire department.
I think you get off on this one, man, Glenn. We'll change managers.
Thank you very much, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll ask for the fire chief, I guess.
Yeah, we'll just ask the fire chief to come in and speak to those questions.
Good morning, Chief. Welcome. Councilor Diachuk, if you'd like to go through this.
Yeah, I probably didn't articulate it very well. In my understanding and discussions we had around fire and being on the scene, and there's a fee that's possible to bill to residences when you're on site through insurance, and I'm probably not grabbing it exactly the way it is, but do you get where I'm going with it?
In the proposed fire bylaw?
Or, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think that's where,
we're at.
we believe that's where we're headed.
Yeah, so in our proposed fire bylaw, we're looking at a fee structure for certain specific incidents. That would be for recovery of specific costs of consumables, things like that. That would be for vehicle fires and vehicle accidents, not structural fires.
So we anticipate that for 2021.
Yes.
I guess, is that built into this at all, or is that?
That would be built into the current budget.
Okay.
So that number you're proposing is $60,000 revenue is what you believe
Yeah,
that
it's
could
an
be
increase
fires.
for 2020,
Okay.
which is probably a little on the lower side, but we're being a little bit, say, fiscally conservative.
Okay. So would that bill, as you're talking about proposing for vehicle fires, would that be on both sides of
Both sides
the city? Okay.
We haven't set the rates yet. We're still looking at what the provincial rates are to see what we're going to go by.
Okay. And so that, when is that bylaw proposed for the new council? The expectation that it might arrive for council?
We're hoping this council may actually have the first brush past it and take a look at it as a part of the process, and then the second and third readings would occur on the committee council.
Okay.
And just for clarity, and just so people understand, structured fires include any residents within the city, so we're not proposing any fee for responding to any incident such as that. That would be covered by our general taxation that pays for that. We're only speaking to vehicle fires and vehicle accidents, just so everybody understands the clarity on that. We're not going to have to pay to have a fire truck come to the house.
Councilor Buckthorn.
Thanks, Your Worship. I think the second part of your question, or somebody's question, was around false alarm piece. Is that built into that proposed bylaw as well coming forward, or not yet?
We're exploring the fees on, in the bylaw related to false alarms, but there's nothing concrete yet. We're still
So there's no proposed revenue line on that at this time then?
The fees are basically structured around the entire cost recovery through the bylaw or outside fees that we're getting grants and things like that.
City Clerk.
If I may, on false alarms, it's a problem across the entire protective services of the police and the fire. So we're looking at possibly a false alarm bylaw, or how we would build that so we can cover all those costs and all those calls, because they all come into our landfill and things.
And it's a large expense in not just our municipality, in multiple places that for those things. So I do think it needs to be on the radar.
You're mobilizing millions of dollars in equipment. Also.
Any other questions for the fire chief at this time? So this is operating, we may have you back for capital once we see what the business are for capital. Thank you, Chief.
Thanks.
Thank you. CFO, if you would like to continue.
Tell if my mic is on or off. Can you hear me? Now?
Can you see the light?
No hazards?
Yeah. The light, that's a good thing.
It's
At the end of the tunnel.
the finance office. They got it.
Okay, capital by department. Fire department, so these are capital items that were submitted and accepted or deferred. So the first item is under fire department, where they had requested Mobile communications and submitted 60,000 and is deferred. Fire truck, half-ton, 60,000 and deferred. SCBA, which is a breathing apparatus replacement program and a requirement under our agreement, 315,000 and accepted. Fire hall 2, exhaust filtration system, 10,000 and accepted. Public safety, we're looking at equipping a unit 2134 for emergency purposes, and it's 17,000 and accepted. RCMP 911 services is looking at a nice audio recorder for 30,000, and that's deferred. RCMP 911 is also looking for a call management system. These two go together hand in hand, and it is 120,000 and deferred. In addition, since we've already put together the presentation, we have new information that has not been included. We are required to do electronic ticketing for Alberta and municipal, and we will require 20,000 from reserves in order to do that, and it will be added in the second draft presentation of the budget. In addition, we have an opportunity to apply for the Provincial Traffic Safety Fund application for pedestrian safety awareness. I believe these are flashing of lights for crossings that do not have signal lights. And we are looking at 29,000 grant application supported by 50,000 for reserves and a total of 44,000 for that program.
Another question, if we could ask the fire chief to come back in, would be so kind. Chief Lee, could you just give a little further explanation to the SCBA replacement program? People that have been involved in the fire service or are, I think, have a very clear understanding, but for the public, $315,000 for 4 letters, whatever. Can you give us a little further explanation?
So currently the SCBA's we have, our newest model that we have is 15 years old. So it's past its life expectancy already. We don't meet the industry standard.
Okay, so would that be,
Sorry. So yeah, currently our newest SCBA that we currently use in the service right now is 15 years old. That meets the life expectancy of those SCBAs currently in use. They don't currently meet the industry standard of, we're running 2216 bottles. Current industry standard is 5,500 PSI. The face pieces we currently have, under the collective agreement, it says all firefighters will have individual face pieces by the end of the collective. The current models that we have right now wouldn't support going to that. Would be cost prohibitive to go that direction. So, based on that, they're at their end of their lifespan, anyways. Meet the current standards that we're 2 standards behind already, and to meet the collective agreement, it would be better to upgrade the entire system at this point.
so once we do this, if the upgrade is approved through the budget, when will the next upgrade do? Are you going to start to
15
budget?
years is what we expect the life
15?
expectancy
Okay,
of this.
so that's 315,000 is really a 15-year spread.
Yeah.
And last time we did this, we did it for about half price. So as things continue on.
Yeah. We expect that any new SCBAs that come in will have a life expectancy of 15 years, and that's when we'll be replacing them and hopefully build that into reserve over the next 15 years.
Okay. I know I'm getting presumptive on this, that the budget, if the budget is approved, the used equipment, will that be put to good use as it has in the past? Have you thought about that already?
We're hoping to explore that. That's somehow.
Because I believe we've had a sister agreement, we've worked with our sister city in Ukraine through the firefighters, group of firefighters that helped organize that. So,
Yeah. And we would look at something along that line.
okay, terrific, because I think it helps with that.
If, just as a point, the item within this, the SCAD and the mass, they're included in our collective agreement, and we have to be compliant to have each member with their own mass by the end of
2022 is when. Yeah.
So it's sort of to bring us into compliance with our collective agreement.
Questions? Anything else? Thank you, Fire Chief. City Manager.
Just a note on the RCMP 911, but nice audio recorder to leave it to brand name.
By deferring those, I just want to make council aware, by deferring those in 21, they will be mandatory in 22. So I believe, and Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but if they're mandated for December 31st, 2020. So they have them in place.
You're absolutely correct. By 2022, December 31st, we will have to have this in place. This is as part of the changes to the systems, and you're absolutely right. The nice recorder. It's a good recorder, but it's
That's both of those items, correct?
That's correct.
Recorder and the call management system.
The call management system requires the updated recorder in order to collect all the information, as well as the updated system will be able to record calls from not only ambulance services but fire services as well, which we don't have to get involved with.
So that's what we talk about planning in the future. Councilor Morris?
Thank you, Your Worship. So would this be one of those, well, it's a matter of opinion, one of those downloading type items where the regulations changed and the money doesn't necessarily follow from provincial levels of government?
This would be where the province has made a decision to go in a certain direction, and we have to, we would meet their requirements. It's the same as the electronic ticketing. They made a decision to move to that platform and require it to follow.
Very good comment, Councilor. I think that
I like the way you said it as well, but
Councilor Wagner.
That's good. Well, you mentioned an electronic ticketing system for 20,000. I think it was just at the beginning. I was just wondering what the electronic ticketing system was.
If we could ask Glenn to come back.
Sorry. Yeah, I apologize.
We might almost need to set up a row of chairs so we can look at it right and give them a nod. Councilor Wagner, if you'd repeat the question.
Sorry,
please.
Glenn, I was just kind of curious on what the electronic ticketing system was.
It's a system that's been mandated by the province to reduce errors and increase efficiencies. So when an officer stops somebody roadside, instead of handwriting a ticket, they will enter the information from drop-down lists and scan their driver's license and it will print a ticket in the car. From there, it's automatically uploaded into the provincial courts database through a batch system each night, and that's how the ticket is generated that way, instead of having to be hand entered, sent to Calgary where the production center is, and hand entered into the system.
Yeah, I guess it eliminates a lot of mistakes as well, and then probably best $20,000 spent.
Yes.
Yeah, very good. Well, that's excellent.
For us as well. It also increases the officer safety at the time. They're not spending as much time with their head down writing a ticket, so it's a little bit better.
Councilor Buckingham.
Thanks, Your Worship. So along with this system, which has been mandated by the provincial government, that should create operational and staff efficiencies here as well then, as far as the transfer of that ticket information, us entering and sending, and there should be some administrative efficiencies to follow that in this venture for spending this money?
We don't actually enter the ticket here. We simply send all of our tickets to Calgary, and they're entered there for the court system, and then from there they're sent to the applicable courthouse, or Vermilion in this case, which is our court center, and we're a circuit point of that. So it's certainly increasing the efficiencies for the court system for the province of Alberta, and to a small degree for us as well, with not having to handle that. It's automatically done.
Glenn, I know, I believe the RCMP have also got that equipment in their cars, I understand, here in the detachment.
Yes, they do. They already have that installed in all the RCMP vehicles. And we are exploring trying to ensure that we can have the same efficiency on the Saskatchewan side as we do on the Alberta side. But that's just a question for our IT.
Okay, well, that's terrific, and once again, that maybe we can, in a bi-provincial city, we can try to find some efficiencies and help the other side with that, and to try and bring that forward, so.
Absolutely. We're exploring that now.
Good. Has there been contact made with the Department of Policing and Corrections in Saskatchewan discussing that, or is that more, that's actually the Attorney General, I guess?
It's actually court services. on the Saskatchewan side, and I was having conversations with him yesterday.
Okay, terrific. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Good on that pass. Thank you very much. Glenn.
Thank you very
Your
much.
worship, while we have Glenn and Doug both, maybe comment on the alert program, because we have had to add a staff position for that as part of our.
So as part of our agreement, we've agreed to fund 2 staffing positions, 1 administrative position and 1 analyst position. We will be, we have advertised for the staffing position for the admin, I think right now, no?
So there are 3 positions. There's 3 different categories of employees being involved. 1 RCMP member, 1 public service, which we agreed to fund. That will be the crime analyst, and then 1 administrative support, which will be a city employee. And that will be out shortly when we start construction. We'll advertise for that position, so they can be ready at the same time.
So in essence, we're going to take one of our members that we pay for and attach that from the detachment to
Yes.
the alert team. So it is in essence paid for by the taxpayer directly, but that way.
I believe Inspector Brockman would comment about that, but it's one of their GIS positions will be moving over.
Okay.
And that's to complement the proposed 14 positions that will be granted to the community at the cost of the other taxpayers.
Thank you for that explanation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn. Any other questions before we move on from Detective Services? Please continue, CFO.
The next slide is our FCSS, our Social Services Department. That department does not have a related capital item to it, it's strictly operational. And social programs and services foster collaboration with the region's social agencies and plays an active role in the community in providing access to preventive services, which in turn builds resiliency, leads to a strong, healthy, social, sustainable community. The social programs and services department net cost increase were kept to a minimum 1% or approximately $4,000, and the same level of service will be provided to the community. This will be achieved by carrying up over unspent funds from COVID-19 council projects in 2020. The budget is utilized for staffing costs and the delivery of community programs such as the Senior Taxi Program, Block Party Program, National Volunteer Week, Recreational Access Program, information and referral workshops, community events, projects such as updating and publishing the Lloyd's Needs Community Services Directory. They have no capital projects requested for 2021. 31% of the budget comes from property taxes, 13% of the budget comes from fees, and 56% of the budget comes from the provincial grants. Of this, 54 or 4% or 515,000 of the budget is distributed to local nonprofits as grants administered by the Social Programs and Services team. They've established a multi-year funding agreement to support the disabled transit service that supports our community.
City Manager.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. This is one of the areas that would be open to discussion with council. We have a very small team of 2 in our social programs and services department right now, and with the increased call it demand or priority in not only the engagement, but we hear in a number of cases, situations with mental health, and number, in those types of situations, that it is one area that, we as administration have discussed expanding our team on that to help, or increasing the funding to the organizations that provide some of these services. So there's a couple different options there, and so it doesn't have to be today that we discuss it, but the administration would like to have that discussion with council, whether it be this council or a future council following the election. But today, we don't have the capacity within our current team to increase any level of service with the size of team we have today.
Okay, Councilor Torsten and Councilor Buckingham.
Thank you, Your Worship. So was there a decrease in funding from the provinces as far as FCSS this year? So I know there was potential that it would be as high as some years, but maybe that was 2 years ago it decreased. Or maybe it stayed the same. My memory is fading.
I will actually take that one. I believe it did stay the same after our discussions with the minister here earlier on with the new government in Alberta, the current government of Alberta, from that perspective. So they've held the funding, and I believe it's being held again for another year for sure. No increase, but certainly they've held that funding that comes to the city from that perspective. So that's Buckingham. I think you said.
Sorry, I just had one more.
Okay, certainly.
Yeah, the only other thing I was going to mention is just, in this area, from what we've seen in the resident feedback, it seems especially clear that even a little bit, I think would go a long way in terms of at least adding to help the issues that are felt in the community, because it's pretty common within that survey that we did, that you saw that mental health issues and things like that popped up. We've had the local needs survey. There's plenty of indication that there's an issue there, whether it be in protective services or where that's coming from. So yeah, I'd be interested in just seeing some sort of proposed idea, even just to see what it is, and then the council that decides on the budget can decide what to do.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll get Councillor Buckingham and I'll come back to you soon, Andrew. Councillor Buckingham.
Yeah, thank you, Worship. There was certainly discussion at a provincial level on the FCSS grant funding. And last year they were talking, there was a chance that they were going to decrease it. In attending the FCSS conference last year, we had the opportunity to speak with the minister as a collective group of FCSS committees across the province. As well, the minister was out, and the mayor and I had breakfast with her one day to discuss the importance of FCSS to the communities. And at that time, they held the funding and on a multi-year level, which, as the mayor alluded to, I think is at least one more year of that is what they've committed to it at this particular juncture. What that looks like going past 2021, I don't know. But right now, that's what they've committed to is the same level, no increase, but no decrease through 2021. To answer that part of the question, the original question I had was, I think the other thing that I hear in the community, we can talk about increasing FCSS funding as a whole, but I think there needs to be some thought given to the communications piece within FCSS and our communications team, perhaps. I think there's a bit of a disconnect in the community as to where do I go for help, right? Who do I contact? How do I get there, right? So I think if we're going to look at that some consideration needs to be given to that community education piece on how to access those things through our team. Because we have a great team and a lot of great resources there, but I don't know that everybody knows how to get to them or when they should or shouldn't.
Before I take your question, Councillor, City Manager.
Yeah, I was just going to confirm the funding, and I think it was about 4 years ago when the NDP came into the Alberta side. That was the first increase, I want to say about 15 years to the SCSS program, and then it has stabilized since then. So, and that is strictly on the Alberta side. We've received no direct FCSS funding from the Saskatchewan government. Outside, there is some tied to the Saskatchewan grant program that we have that we get. I think it's $60,000 a year.
Thank you.
To distribute to the community members.
I'll get Councillor Chuck and then come Councillor Monroe. Councillor Chuck.
Thanks, First. I agree with the communications part. Part of the role that I have at college is working with the post-secondary mental health grant, and one of the requirements is that we work with the community agencies. And one of the things we found was that there was a high level of miscommunication or lack of knowledge of what each of the agencies kind of did and trying to find where the cracks were in services. I know that Laura Lee Marion was involved in creating, so I think the Regional Health Foundation, a service where you could simply log in and look at the various services and where to find it. But I think importantly, the interactions between the agencies and understanding fully how there needs to be a sort of a seamless environment, particularly around this area of mental health. And so my recommendation would be is that prior to us going too far down this path would be to establish that sort of a connection with that regional committee that we have in our community to get some direction and advice from them. Because I think partnership process is the only way to go in this around this level of service. And for us to take it on ourselves would be really missing out, I think, on the synergy we would gather by working together with other agencies.
Thank you, Councillor Monroe.
Yeah, I think with obviously the feedback that was received through the surveys, obviously social services and that sort of thing is very top line for a lot of individuals in our community. We've heard of the social needs assessment, which was presented right kind of at the beginning of our term as council. So I think our community, from our SSS perspective, has done a good job at addressing some of those concerns with the resources that we have available. And it's not even, it is about bringing awareness and communication to the other organizations that provide these services in our community. But I wouldn't be opposed to actually looking at the expansion of our own SASS department. The two individuals that are there currently do an amazing job, and they're very present. But maybe there is opportunity that perhaps department needs to be expanded a little bit from our perspective. Even though there are other resources in the community, these two can only do so much in terms of communication and bringing awareness. At the end of the day, the residents, whether or not it's direct, responsibility of the community to provide the social service programming, our residents are our responsibility. So I do think that it is worth taking a visit to see what it looks like, what other municipalities are doing. I don't know other municipalities that are size, whether Saskatchewan or Alberta, I don't know what the structures of their SASS departments. So even just having that knowledge to come forward to us would be, or to the next council, would be very beneficial, I think, in making decisions about what the potential is for expansion for our own.
Executive Magistrate.
Thank you. I can speak to that a little bit, Your Worship. For a municipality our size, we're one of the smallest in Alberta for sure. I know that department does a lot of work and takes on as much as they can. I know in the last year to 2 years, we've really prioritized what programs they're focusing on and delivering because there's only so much time. And when you only have one coordinator and one manager of the program, it's very difficult to deliver all those services across the organization. And I know from a social programs services perspective, they've been looking for a resource for a few years now, taking into consideration all the mental health issues that are coming forward. There is opportunity for us to do a little bit more in that area if we did have those additional resources, which is why city manager is bringing that forward under this proposal. Patrick is online. He is having a hard time hearing all the comments and everything, but if there is a specific question that somebody after Patrick, we can try to relay that best we can and have him provide a response.
Thank you, Executive Magistrate.
Thank you. I just want to add, just want to add one little bit to it because I think we do have the service of the psychiatric nurse that's available at our hospital. The reality is that person works Monday to Friday, 8 to 4:30 or whatever sort of that day is. What we see from the other work that I do is that rarely do those crises occur within that period of time. And so what happens is that we'll often see people that we serve at the college get over there and they'll wait for 2 or 3 hours. They're in crisis, they've been triaged, highly suicidal, but 3 hours later they're fine. Someone comes in and goes, yeah, you're okay, away you go, and go back to wherever wherever you live and came from, so to speak, and really nothing's been done. So I mean, we do have a level of services, but I think once the hospital found out that we don't provide clinical services at the colleges, as a for instance, they went, oh, well, we didn't know that. So I think there's the whole process of getting sort of a much larger understanding of the level of services and what each agency sort of provides. It gives a better sense of where the gaps are, and then how do we try to fill those gaps. And I think that's part of this whole process. So there are some really good pieces in place. The challenge is, what role do we play in filling those gaps? And I think we can serve as a facilitator, but again, I don't know that it's our role to say we're going to carve out tax dollars to hire a psychiatric nurse for a 24-hour shift or one of those sorts of things. But there's lots of work around communication that needs to be done.
Sure.
Yeah, just to speak to that, that's a very good point because that's something that we feel very strongly about. We're not in the business of being counselors, but bringing education programs in regards to how mental health is handled, and bringing organizations together is what FCSS and what that department does, and that's something we'd be focusing on, trying to get more of that information out, bring organizations together, and bring that awareness to mental health in the community versus being on the ground counseling services for the people that need.
Just to build on that, I think Patrick took the training that was provided through the College of Mental Health grant along with Megan, and I forgot her last name, sorry. Yeah, so they're from a city's perspective in terms of what we're doing for employees, or what we're making available and all around. And it's really Canadian mental health grant and program that's being provided in there. So, but the reality is that we live in a much bigger fishbowl, so to speak, and we have a role to play, and I think in large part the pieces that we're attending to as a city. So.
Councilman.
Yeah, I think it just comes back to the fact of us having the resources. What the resources that we have now, I think that our CSS department, along with communications, do a really great job of bringing that awareness for the availability that we have. I mean, I see forever on Facebook and social media that we're offering different courses through this time. This afternoon, for instance, there's a leading to change with data run that's promoted through the XSS. And it's been, our marketing and our communications for the resources that we have, I think we do a good job at. But if we want to be able to expand on that and be able to provide further services and bring further awareness, then we do have to evaluate the team that we have in place and have more tools to be able to support that. So I think it's definitely a conversation we're having.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Torres.
Thank you, Your Worship. So just, at the end of the day, as far as all these things, from my perspective is, I definitely don't believe that the city should be in the business of providing health care. That's the responsibility of SaskHealth, and they should be not abdicating their responsibilities to the city. So that's one point that I want to make just really clear when I say that there could be some areas we could help there. I also, don't know what the right answer is as far as is the city staff so overtaxed on what they have going on that they're not able to do anything more than they're already doing. And if that's the truth, then, that particular recommendation should come forward. Or if we know that the services are already being provided by certain groups within the city, but they could use a little bit more resources so we could target it to a specific area that may be most beneficial to people in this particular area, that's also a great option. So I'd just be interested in seeing, what city administration can come up with for another version of this budget to see whether there's anything we can realistically do within a responsible budget. So thank you.
Councilor Doja.
I'm just going to add, if I could, I think that certainly mental health has taken a higher profile as we've entered this COVID era, if you like. And I know there are programs that are available, and every one of the colleges is expected to go through the RESPECT program, and it's about 90 minutes long, and really does speak a bit towards the mental health of everybody who's in the organization. My own, I guess, the piece that I would suggest is that we keep our eyes and ears open, because I think there are other programs and grants that may become available as part of the COVID era and efforts by provincial and federal governments to address this. This isn't going away, and it's it's spiking, and we're seeing more of it. So there may be opportunities like this, and I know our folks are aware of that, keeping their eyes open. So part of the bigger solution, I guess, is the piece I would keep advising around this, because what our role is, and other organizations that are much better staffed and equipped to respond to that, we can support them in this process.
I think we've had some great discussion. I think we've given direction to administration, because it certainly was highlighted in the survey with the residents. And we've discussed, and I totally agree it is a provincial matter, but at the same token, if we can help facilitate from the city's perspective and ensuring making those connections in this community between a multitude of organizations and service providers, that's very critical. And as we all know around this table, the bi-provincial nature of our city just challenges us just that much more. So if the city needs to look at facilitation and being a greater player in that to ensure that transition of information, I think it's very important. City manager.
Yeah, that's great feedback, great discussion, we appreciate that. And I think we've got enough to go back and put together something that we can bring back to council.
Terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council.
All right, CFO, please carry on.
The next slide we have is planning and economic development area, and that includes economic development and land division. And we had planned to go for a lunch break after that section, so we'll skip from economic development, land division, then we'll go to capital, and then we'll come have to take a break.
Terry is here as well.
They are.
Terry is here.
Okay, good.
Great.
So the details on this. So economic development. This department's primary goal is economic vitality, growth, and development that stimulously improves quality of life. The budget is conservative, but will work towards ensuring that the city is investment ready and open for business. It includes I'm not sure if I can say that, programmatic marketing, efficient paid advertising direct to our target market, Business survey. Annual business survey is an important part of our business retention and expansion program. Marketing, activation, events, and sponsorships. Several events, conferences, and sponsorships are budgeted. We recognize the need to be where the potential client is. These industries events include ICSC Whistler, Sports Tourism Congress, Alberta Beef Congress, and Agrivisions. Included in this budget is the Startup Lloydminster. The entrepreneurial development is a key function of economic development, and in the past, Startup Lloydminster received funding through third-party asks. This type of funding opportunity has been discontinued, and a funding agreement is going forward under the Economic Development Department. Under Land Division,
Just to be clear on that, so it says the funding opportunities have been discontinued. What we've done is looked at, instead of third-party asks, that end of it has been discontinued, and we look at negotiating a multi-year agreement with Startup Lloydminster moving forward, and so that process is going to hopefully start in the next short while. So just to be clear, I didn't want to make it look, it almost sounded like that the startup money was discontinued, and that wasn't the intent. It was the third-party agreements were discontinued, and we're looking at longer range fundings for not only startup, but there's a couple others, library and picture, as well as the SPCA.
Thank you, City Manager.
Land Division is committed to serving the community as a leading local developer. Land Division is responsible for the development, sale, and maintenance of the city-owned land assets, as well as the acquisition of land for future development. Our 2021 budget is built around continuing product development while enhancing the community placemaking. Our budget, along with parks and marketing and communication, includes dollars for initiatives that improve the overall attractiveness and livability of our neighborhoods. These items include a banner infill program, Colonial Park community signage, playground equipment, as well as attendance at trade shows and marketing events. Under Engineering Services, they administer engineering and construction of critical new infrastructure such as roads, trails, sidewalk, water, sanitary main, and civic amenities within the city of Lloydminster. Geomatic Services is responsible for the GIS data and the creation of various drawings, maps for the city departments, which are also made available to the public. For engineering, the difference in the 2021 budget is the building of a budget to program rather than a program to budget. The budget requests for 2021 have been determined using consultant construction cost estimates and design drawings to ensure that the requested budget has been vetted through the design process and accurately reflects the project being proposed. The 2021 street improvement program will focus on rehabilitation style programs rather than new construction to maximize the benefit to residents.
Councilor Dorsey.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I actually just have a question on the slide that we're on right here, and it was just about where does it fit into the equation? Is it something we need to do in 2021? Is negotiating intermunicipal collaboration framework with the County of Vermilion?
I can take that and answer the best I can. So we're not required, obviously, to do that as required to do our charter. However, I think it's in our best interest to do that. So it's our opinion we don't need dollars to do that. We should be able to negotiate that internally with our existing staff and member of council. So we have had some brief discussions with the county on that process, along with the annexation process. So it's all tied into one. And so we've had preliminary discussions, but in terms of when and how that will take effect, that has not been determined. So.
Where are the budget items for those? Would that be included in planning and development or within the city manager's office?
I believe there's a little bit under legal, there's a little bit under consulting fees under planning, and then any financial implications that come out of any of those items will have to come to council for a draw from reserve. So we have not budgeted for any financial implications outside of a little bit of legal work and such like that. So.
Thank you. And then I think, as you were reading these things, are we on the next slide when we start talking about street improvement?
There will be,
Okay.
yeah, he kind of spoke to how he's planning his,
Okay, I understand.
okay?
Please
So,
carry on, CFO.
so to finish off engineering, there's a slight increase to contracted services for traffic counts. Geomatics, completion of phase 1 of the GIS strategic plan with the transition to the current GIS system to Ezra. Addition of a manager of GIS to lead the transition and guide the development of the GIS system into the future. Question?
Councilor.
Thank you. When you say addition of a manager, because there was no increase in number of employees,
So
correct?
there is no increase in the number of position counts, but there is some reorganization, moving some vacant positions around in order to accommodate some changes.
Okay, thank you.
City Manager.
Yeah. So as part of the GIS master plan that was completed, I believe in 2019, it spoke to the need for additional resources within the GIS planning team. And so what we've done is looked at our planning team and engineering team overall, and we have found some efficiencies in other positions and created this position as well. So, there might be a slight dollar difference between the two positions either way, but that's the indication that we've, so it's not a new position, a new funded position. We've allocated resources from another area of that part of Terry's department to take some of the burden off, knowing some of the pressures that are being coming with the wastewater treatment plant construction. Terry's department's also dealing with fire department construction and our ongoing just engineering projects that are increasing every year.
Thank you. Any other questions at this time? CFO, please carry on.
So if I move on to planning and development leads the path in making the community vision a reality by assisting residents, developers, builders, and other stakeholders with their planning and building requirements. Operations remain relatively static in cost. Overall, for the planning and economic development area, there is a decrease in operating revenues related to forecasted development permits for 2021. The increase in expenses relate to the transfer to reserves that were previously recorded under general government. So if we go to the capital work for this area, we submitted $35,000 for pictometry air photo update, and it was accepted. Municipal development plan update, $150,000, and that was accepted. Under land development, we've proposed land acquisition of 1.5. Opportunities exist to secure strategically located land in and around the community to secure future growth and investment opportunities. This is strictly a budget number.
From the photo and air photo and Victoria update, how often does that happen? Is that annuals, 5 years, because things do continuously change?
Yeah, the last article was taken back in 2016, so we typically like to do that on a every 2 to 5 year basis, depending on how much actual development occurs. Carries you to
Yeah, a little more.
Executive Manager Don Sang is right on the air photo side of things. What we've got planned for 2021 is actually the pictometry side of things, which is different than our actual air photo side. Our assessment team uses this extensively for doing the preliminary assessment of those developments throughout the city. And I've kind of equate this to almost like a Google Street View type of initiative, but it's specifically in this application. And for $35,000, it's pretty reasonable.
So that's the technology that I believe that's being moved to, Terry. Is that a good description?
No, we've been using pictometry often for the last probably 6 years now. I think this has been 3 years since we did an update of it. It's been more than 2 for sure. Yeah. And on average, I would say we probably want to do this one, the specific type of one, probably every 2.
On the municipal development plan.
I was going to say, so what's the benefit to us then?
It enables the assessors to do that tabletop review of the application, so they can do that. It's an overhead picture, or they can see it on the computers as an overhead. But also, you can kind of pan it around and kind of do that initial assessment of the actual development happening on the site. And keeping that current enables them to catch up with any additions or renovations that are happening from that perspective. Other departments may use that for similar type things too, but mainly the assessment are the big ones of this system.
So there's potential for a revenue gain out of this process as well.
Yeah, well, I think, yeah,
Okay.
I agree, yeah.
On the municipal development plan update, that is again on the schedule, and are we following that basically from that?
Yeah, this is good question, Mayor. And our municipal plan, development plan that we have currently in place is our first one that we've ever created. As we moved into the MGA guidance with Alberta, and I believe it's 6 years old now, maybe touching 7 years old, so it's time to do an update and refresh, and just to see if our horizons that we wanted to meet for development are right, or whether they need to be adjusted up or down accordingly. So, yeah.
And that would likely be a contracted service we'd look for.
Yeah, it definitely needed some support to dive into those specifics for sure. Yeah, stakeholders, all that kind of pieces like that. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions at this time for Gary and Councillor Corson?
Thank you, Your Worship. The municipal development plan, that one is the statutory document that drives down into all the other bylaws and documents that support it, correct?
That is correct, Councillor. The MPP is our top statutory document, where the land use follows below that, and we get into specific development from there. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Last call for questions at this time. Don't go too far, Terry, but thank you. Won't let you off yet. CFO, please carry on.
The next slide has operating for transportation services. So transportation services includes airport, fleet, roads, and Transport Canada liaison. And the following would be capital for those areas. So transportation services overall 21 operating budget will not increase. The same level of services will be provided to the community. Airport only increases. Airport as a whole has only increases that are inflationary and adjustments to internal costs. Fleet services with the purchase of new equipment over the years and implementing best practices in the maintenance of equipment. Administration can extend the life of city equipment, thus reducing the amount of capital replacement purchases required. Under road services, we have a reduction of $345,000 in contract services for winter maintenance. The upgrade of tandems over single axle trucks provides the city administration with the ability to complete more of the required winter maintenance work and allows for the hauling of more snow. A reduction of $100,000 in materials. This is due to a variety of tasks that were reduced, one being a reduction in costs associated with the traffic light replacement, with the change from the original incandescent lights, incandescent bulbs, to the new LED traffic lights. Under Transport Canada liaison, budget is relatively inflationary increases, but will include emergency response training and planning to conduct a joint training exercise with CFB Cold Lake early in the summer of 2021. Overall for this area, transportation services, revenue and expenses have been both modestly increased since 2020. However, there's not enough revenue to offset the additional expense, which resulted in a 1% decrease in the surplus.
City Manager.
Yeah, just before we get too far into the capital and the operations of transportation services, this wasn't scheduled until just after lunch. And so any questions, we may want to wait until Dave is here after lunch, so we may want to break. Unless there's questions on what Denise has said to Dave, but in terms of the detail, our transportation director is not here, and so he was scheduled for 12:45, so I'd suggest that we break now and reconvene at 12:45. I thought it was for council.
He's always away if we want to wait.
Well,
Council's call. I'm not sure I'm going to do it, but he's always away.
So we might be able to go through the capital, and if there's questions related
Sure.
to fleet, we can ask them when he gets here or after lunch.
we'll see how traffic's moving today, and we'll go from there. So let's carry on for now, and if we do get bogged down, that's when we'll take a break. I believe lunch is scheduled for 11:45, 12 o'clock in there, so.
So for capital items for the transportation services, replace the boiler system at the airport, 50,000 has been accepted. Taxi rehabilitation, 200,000 was submitted and has been deferred. Airport signage, 50,000 was submitted and 50,000 deferred. Snowplow truck replacement, 253,000 and is accepted. That is supported by a grant only and will not continue if we do not receive a grant.
Councilman Rowe?
Just in regards to that airport signage, having it deferred under transportation services, is there room for it anywhere else in economic development? Or I feel like if we're trying to bring, I guess it's administration's direction, but if we're trying to bring business into our community, have anyone been out to the airport and actually seen the Lloydminster Airport sign? I've had a lot of positive feedback in regards to the 4 signs that we've just installed, northeast, south, and west. That, you know, it's nice to see the community investing, Lloydminster investing back into the city. If we want to bring in economic development, we want people to be developing and investing in our cities, that we need to show pride in our community as well. So I'm just a little bit apprehensive about that one being delayed, just because obviously there's a budgetary impact, but at the same time, if the airport is going to start upping their services and we're having more people coming in and out of there, I think it's important that we also as a community take a little bit of pride in it, and from my point of view, possibly revisit that.
Okay, Councilor Buckingham.
Thank you, Worship. To Councilor Monroe's point, is there any specifics on what the request was for that signage? Is there something specific they wanted to do or a change or upgrade, just so we know what we were looking at here? If we want to revisit it, I'd like to know a little more about what that might have been in the budget.
See, the deal for communications.
Are you officially calling me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so this was kind of a joint project with economic development. I can speak to high level. We talked about entryway signage at the main gateway to the airport, some sort of modern, I don't want to call it basic, but modern attractive signage that reflected the airport brand. There's some dated signage on the building itself, on the air side, which was up for discussion, and as well, the most familiar one you've probably seen is the wooden sign out front, where it refers to the Lloydminster Air Terminal, I believe it says now. So we'd be looking at an update to that as well. So it was at a high level, a 3, maybe a 4-part signage refresh project, which could be done in phases, budget depending. I don't know what else I can add to that at this time, but it was kind of just a high level proposal at this time.
Yeah, it makes more sense to me now, because if we're just talking about that one airport terminal sign or whatever, what all are we looking at here? Is it a complete rebrand, refresh? So that answers my question on it for sure.
So why do we find that there's not enough value in moving forward with that, even in the first stage at this point?
I can speak to that. As our projects are brought forward and prioritized, it was one that was low on a priority list. And as we were looking for efficiencies for our capital budget, it was one that we looked at and thought we could defer for a year to help save capital. It's pretty simple.
However, that's why you guys have the decisions to tell us if you feel different, and we can make those changes. So if that's something that you council feels is a priority, then we can make the necessary adjustments. So we are open to that feedback.
I mean, I guess as we work through the budget line by line, we can see what some of these capital expenditures are, and perhaps there is savings somewhere else that we can reallocate here. I know that maybe it's a small thing at the end of the day, but at the same time, I think it's very important that we, as a city, show pride, and we show that we're willing to invest beyond just roads and water, that we're willing to invest in what our community looks like and how it is portrayed to others. So I do think I would like to revisit it, depending on, as we work through the budget, where we can find any cost savings.
If I could ask you, the other thing I'm hearing is that there are a number of pieces involved in this whole signage thing. So it might even be worthwhile to split it out. So, I heard there was 4 pieces that are involved in the signage. So there may be, places we can save money and do part A, B, C, D as we go along through that process. So just so that there's flesh on the bones, if you like, might be worthwhile sort of filling that up.
Yeah, and I think, not to speak out of my department here, but I think, maybe I want to expand on this, but I think the signage refresh was actually part of some ongoing plans, upgrades, whatever you want to call it, at the airport over the long term, so I'm not 100% sure where it fits in scheduling wise.
City Manager, if you-
I believe the branding slash signage slash a number of different marketing things was part of the master plan that came out as over the overall long term, so it's definitely it's not out of line with the master plan that was done this past year, it's just in terms of priority for this year. Administration didn't view it as a high priority, but again, we're open to suggestion and we'll see what we can come up with throughout the rest of the day here. If there's money to allocate, we can do that.
Appreciate that, because I think as the city manager alluded to, there was we had the short, medium, and long-term plans that were presented in that airport master plan, and certainly 0 to 2 or 0 to 3 years, I think, was the short term. So we certainly can look at that from that perspective. I think that's the best thing we can do is put that one in the parking lot, saying there's some potential there. We'll see where the dollars and cents go.
I think the other part was a message worth sharing to the people that provide services for us as well, is that, you know, if you're WestJet flying in and out and see our commitment to updating signage and all the other pieces there, we're working with them in the same way to make sure that as we elevate our services and ask for more from them, there's a visible commitment on our part. So I think there's more to it. There's more beyond that.
I think that brings a real good support mechanism to that, because when we're in discussions with WestJet and other carriers, looking at the possibility, what does our airport look like? And that is the first image when we land, is what you get. It's no different than we just discussed the signage of our community when we drive into the community, the appearance of the general community. It's all taken into account. That first impression from the sales perspective is very, very important. Good discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the things for the airport as well, the master plan, talks long term about, it's within the short, medium, or long term with the expansion of the terminal, all different things like that. So we're also cognizant we don't want to spend money ahead and, in 2 years from now, we're adding on to the building and replacing the signage or whatever again. So we want to leave asked that department for a long range view of that, of what a next 10-year capital looks like and longer. And so we'll see what that, again, we'll take this into consideration and discussion.
Councilor Torson.
Thank you, Richard. Not about the sign, so thanks, Leo. I have a question about the next couple: snow plow replacement, grader, de-icing. De-icing, I know what all of them are, but my question is, in terms of usage and everything else, does a grader, could you take a grader that was out of service from the rest of city operations and bring it to the airport, or does it not work the same way? Is there kind of some hair on that idea? Does it get the same use that a regular one would, where it's going the whole day, all day during the big storm?
Yeah, I can see traffic is late today, so Dave Heading has arrived.
I was going to say the traffic lights are sure working out there. Dave's here, you can speak to it. Those capital items, the snowplow, the grader, the de-icing equipment, they're all tied to grant funding, ACAP funding.
Yeah.
So until we get that funding, those purchases will be put in place. I'll let Dave speak to the operations of that equipment.
Yeah, that's correct. So the plow truck is over 20 years old already. So ACAP sets up a 20-year life cycle on outdoor equipment. So they have suggested that some airports could use a grader. It's on. Sorry.
Oh, it is? No, okay. Sorry.
So they have suggested that some airports could use a grader. So they had set up the funding program for that. We had initially put in last year when they proposed it, but they pulled all the funding for 2020. So it rolled over into 2021.
Okay, fair enough.
So this is just to expand on the ACAP funding, that is a federal program because we are regulated by the federal government, and from that perspective, our airport is recognized for that. That's why we received the funding when we finally did for the repaving of the runway. And this is an ongoing discussion that I carry out with administration does it at the administrative level, but I raise this with our MPs, and this is a federal funded program through Transport Canada. So, as you know, and they saw it last year, I think all of these equipment pieces were on last year's capital budget, subject to the ACAP funding, and as Dave said, it was withdrawn or reduced, and we're on the list with many other communities, and we'll continue to try and raise that with the Minister of Transport federally, as well as our MPs carrying that lobby.
Yeah, that's correct. So the snowplow, the grader, and the de-icing equipment is all part of ACAP funding. They have changed the process for de-icing the runway, so that's why they have proposed the trailer equipment also. So we are hoping that we find out in February, we are hoping that they're going to the money for the purchases.
Okay.
And certainly, we have the location being close to Cold Lake CFB, and certainly that, trying to use that as a wrestle point with the federal government, realizing that if for some reason Cold Lake has an issue, we need to be able to land CF-18s at this airport and fuel them and put them back in the air for the Defense of Canada and a few other things. So we sit in a very good position, but again, it's just a federal lobby that we have to carry out and go from there. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks.
Go too far, though. I think we'll get back up here. Obviously.
Okay, I'll continue down the list. Starting at the terminal building maintenance, 50,000 was submitted and accepted. Airport parking lot design, 50,000 submitted and accepted. Under fleet services, looking for a SUV, 55,000 accepted. All the services, all the listings under fleet services would be supported by a draw from the fleet reserve. Unit 51, half-ton truck, 46,000. Grader, 580,000. Half-ton truck, 46,000. Utility side-by-side, 25,000. Front mount mower, 34,000. Wing mower, 126,000. And golf carts, 175. Accepted 100,000 and deferred 75,000.
I have a question regarding the costing, so certainly on the SUV and half tons. Is that a true full cost, fully equipped with all safety and required materials from that? When we start at the SUV as an example versus and then go down to the half ton.
It is on the half tons. The SUV, the reason it's a little more money is that is one of the peace officer units, and they are being upgraded to law enforcement specs, and they will, Glenn's team has also budgeted extra for the light packages and stuff, so they come as a unit for law enforcement, and then there's an addition to put on.
Okay. So, and just if I could, so the SUV, the earlier capital item for, I believe it was 17,000, was for to outfit that vehicle with its light packages and its equipment. The SUV that is a 2251, the half-ton truck, is also a bylaw. That's a replacement for the full radar unit, and it'll just be a transfer of equipment from one to the other. That's why we didn't budget for that light.
Yeah, and also once this unit is put into fleet as the package, then the reserve down the road will replace it as a package. So down the road, you won't see two different budgets for one unit. It'll be a complete unit through the reserve.
Okay. Moving on to the grader, Dave.
Yep.
We currently have 2 graders in the city package. I know one is, can you give us an age on both of those graders so that, because that's a chunk of change, and but I'm sure you could explain this.
Yeah, so the grader that's up for replacement is 10 years old, has 7,000 hours on it right now. And to keep up with the industry standard, to get a little value out of the unit. The other unit is 5 years old. So what we've set them up is we bought them, basically 5 years apart, but put a 10-year life on them right now.
Terrific.
And the cost difference is it's a totally different unit. It's a lot bigger grader than what the airport would be putting out there.
So will that grader have snow removal capabilities or snow pushing capabilities?
Oh yeah. So we use it for all our residential snow removal, outside roads, everything like that, and it's in all our gravel roads are graded like that. It's in the city also.
So is that taken into account any value for the old machine, or will we be?
No, that is the list value of the unit. I have spoken to the auctioneer companies and stuff like that, and they can't even guarantee a price on equipment right now.
Yeah, understand. When you say list, did we go through Summa Advantage and our source? Again, I've got the name, they've been different names. Central Source, and yes.
We're hoping we can.
Okay.
The trucks last year, the half tons and 3/4 tons that were purchased last year compared to the price this year, have went up 20%.
Okay.
And I think part of it is the availability of equipment right now. I have ordered equipment with 280 to 300 day delivery dates, so the incentive isn't quite there as it was.
Okay, and I will come back on that same comment. My contacts in the construction industry or supply industry say, don't be afraid to go direct to our dealers areas and ask for a quote outside of the Central Source, because so there's some pretty hungry dealers, I understand, that would like to move some machinery, and I know that there are a few providers of graders. They become limited compared to what they used to be, but certainly my recommendation for what it's worth is don't be afraid to go out as far and as wide with the cast of the net to see, because we might be surprised.
Yeah, we did this year do some out of the box pricing and stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think
double check some pricing on some equipment.
I think at the time right now, as we look to taxpayers for money, and they're going to hear from us, and we're going to hear from them, I think we need to ensure that we've tried everything possible to get the best bang for the dollar that we have today, especially when we start talking about $500,000 piece of equipment, which is essential, because we do have graded roads as well as it's used in snow removal, so appreciate that.
Yeah, thing to note there, Your Worship, on the grader, we are going through a process of annexation, and with annexation comes additional potential road salts, and typically in the form of gravel, that we need the grader for. And Dave, can you just confirm, the additional cost we're seeing with regards to truck and 3/4 ton, that's been addressed in this budget, correct?
Yes, it has. This has been up correctly for this budget. We are hoping that when things do pick up in the industrial industry of manufacturing, that things will level off again also.
Thank you. Councilor Torson.
Thank you, Your Worship. One of the items that was mentioned is one of the units being purchased is the photo radar vehicle. Is that correct?
It's replacing a photo radar vehicle, yeah. So there is additional equipment in that unit that has to be switched over, the mounting plates and everything. There's a lot of changes and stuff like that.
Okay, so then the vehicle, so are we talking about the one that does, like, it sits there most of the day? Because my understanding was in the past that we would use kind of more recycled vehicles that were nearing the end of life to do that. I thought the first one was that, because it doesn't move as much as the other one. It's mostly there to sit.
Yeah, so this one here is a unit that is already 2 years old.
Oh, okay, so this is just a switchover cost.
This is a switchover.
Okay.
So this here is replacing an existing unit. This one will be going down to a 90 series, which is our summer usage equipment for those students and everything else.
Gotcha. I think I understand.
Okay.
You're doing it the exact way that I would like you to do it.
That's good. That's good.
City manager.
Yeah, Your Worship, just to talk about, you asked about the, replacement cost or the trading value, I guess. So because these come from reserves, the trading value, and I think Denise would agree, is that the trading value would go back to the reserve. So if we get $200,000 for our existing unit, then, the 580 would go against it, but the 200,000 is go back into the reserve, which is collected on a monthly basis as Dave collects monthly fees. I believe it's monthly flat fees from all the different departments to generate the fleet reserve in which we're at, that pays for the equipment that goes out. So these purchases have no impact on the tax rate outside of the monthly contributions that are made by the individual departments for their equipment.
Okay. Thank you. If you want to just touch on the mowers, Dave, because I think that out of the budget, these always are ones that people ask, why is the city getting more machinery? So if you can give us just an hourly.
The front mount mower, that 1126, so that is a 6-foot front mount mower that travels our roads within the city of Lloyd and everything. And it's reached its 8-year life also on it. These units definitely, are in pretty good shape for a person that uses them once every 2 weeks. But our units are used 8 hours a day all summer long and follow all the routes throughout the city. So it is essential to keep them up and cut the downtime. The one that we're replacing actually runs with another one, so they have a route to follow, all to the site, and then they travel from there.
Okay.
The big wing mower, that's the rough cut mowers with the two wings on each side of it. So this one here will actually go out to the airport to replace an old one up there, and the new one will be put into full service for parks, which runs 8 to 10 hours a day all summer long. So
Excellent. Councilor Torson?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just on the golf carts, how many golf carts are we getting there, and then how many was originally requested? Because I know there was a few years back where there was a bunch that were leased, and that lease all came to an end at some point, and
yes, years ago, yeah, there was some, and the leases expired them all, so they are city property. The existing golf carts are 6 to 7 years old already. We did put in for 25 last year and purchased 15. The 175 would be the purchase for another 25, and we'll try to go with 15. If we do that, then we can set up a replacement program every 6 to 7 years to replace them.
okay, so then the oldest one would be 7 years old, then you'd be replacing
Yep, that's
maybe
right.
15 each year?
Well, we could.
Last year, we replaced 15 for around like 68,000. So what we would do is with 100,000 we have budgeted this year, basically replace as many as we can, because they're essentially mostly all due for replacement anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll just keep going until we get that whole fleet replaced, and then we'll be replacing the first one we bought here last year.
Yeah.
After that 7 or 8 year process, we're doing our best to try and
Force yourself into laddering, so that means you're gonna end up having to use some of the really old ones for a little bit longer than you planned, and those will be probably the least used, because most people won't jump into that one right away, but they could have more downtime.
Okay, so what we replaced this year is 2012s already, which are years old already. So.
Yeah.
And a few 13s, and so then we're just going to keep working up the ladder. And when it's set up, it'll be set up through the equipment reserve also, and it will have a rotational period, the same as our other equipment does.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Buckingham?
Thanks, Your Worship. Thanks, Dave. That wing mower you were talking about, you referenced the airport. I was just wondering if that was something that might have played into the annexation piece as well as a rough cut as we're going into the, what we would call now more rural, or is that just designated for the airport?
That's designated for the airport, and that's a different mower. So for our annexation purposes, what we do is use the big rough cut that's pulled behind the tractor, and it's a different unit altogether.
All right. Any other questions for Dave on fleet services at this time? By the look of the clock, we're pretty much just about on time. Thanks very much for making it over here, Dave, to answer these questions. But don't go too far, we'll keep you after lunch, I think, from that perspective. So with that, I would look for a recess. Motion to recess, second by Councilor Fagin. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. We'll